Welcome back to another episode of Orinda Talks. I'm your host Orinda, and today we are talking about Little House on the Prairie. This series is one of my old favorites. I remember after school I would run home, getting something to drink, and then the Little House on the Prairie was on. It was something I would watch together with my mother, and the things we really loved was just the simple family life. Little House on the Prairie is a long-running drama based upon the Little House series of books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Little House on the Prairie follows the lives of the simple farming Ingalls family: Charles, Caroline, Mary, Laura, Carrie, and then Grace. And later they adopted Albert, James, and Cassandra, who settled into a quiet little house on the banks of Plum Creek near the small town of Walnut Grove during the late 1800s. Often narrated by Laura, the series follows her simple farm upbringing from her childhood until her adulthood with Amanda Wilder, with whom she starts a family of her own. While the series is based upon the Little House books, and thus the real life of author Laura Ingalls Wilder, it is a very loose adaptation with mostly only key events and elements of facts surviving the transitions from book to TV series. The most important being Mary's eventual blindness and Laura's future. Several other fictitious, some factual characters make up the friendly community of Walnut Grove, including teacher Miss Beadle, succeeded by two other teachers than Laura and Etta Plum, Dr. Hiram Baker, Reverend Robin Alden, Mr. Hansen of the Hansen Lumber Mill, and the well-do, of course, the Olsen, owner of the local mercantile and also the primary rivals of the Ingalls family, except the Olsen patriarch. Family friends include the Edwards family, the Garvey family, and the Carters, who in the final season move into the Ingalls' Little House. Little House explores many different themes, including frequently portrayed ones of adoption, alcoholism, fate, poverty, blindness, and prejudice of all types, including racism. Some plots also include subjects such as drugs addiction, leukemia, child abuse, and even rape. Although predominantly as drama, the program has many light-hearted and comical moments as well. Most of the characters are very lovable and the stories are very nice. I really enjoy the simplicity but also the family dynamics. So let me talk with you now about some of my favorite characters. Charles Ingalls. Charles Ingalls is the husband of Caroline Ingalls and the father of Mary, Laura, Carrie, Charles Jr., and Grace, as well as the adoptive father of Albert Quinn, James, and Cassandra Cooper. Charles' parents are Laura Colby and Lansford Ingalls. He has two siblings, Peter and Polly Ingalls. Charles grew up in Wisconsin and remained there with his family until it became too populated and it was starting to grow scarce of food. Caroline, Charles, and their children loved the big woods and went to Kansas. After many hardships, they settled for a while, but later were ordered to leave by the government because they lived on Indian territory. The Ingalls family then settled in Plum Creek of Walnut Grove, Minnesota. In order to obtain the deed for their land, Charles took several jobs like working at Hansen Mill and repairing the roof and stacking bags of grain at the feed and seed for Liam O'Neill, under the condition that if it was not done in time, O'Neill could take Charles' new oxen and collateral at a family picnic while getting a kite down from a tree, Charles fell and broke several bones, and was advised not to do any work by Dr. Baker. Charles, however, attempted to finish stacking the grain bags and the feed and seed, but soon was unable to continue. Laura and Mary followed Charles into town and tried to work themselves, and thankfully were soon aided by the men of Walnut Grove. The job got finished and scheduled, and Charles got to keep the access. Charles' personality is perhaps a bit more soft-spoken than most of the men of that time. When he did lay down the law, so to speak, it was usually more of a tough love, though not always the case. An example of this would be when the Gallagher brothers came to Walnut Grove and attempted to rape Caroline. Furious, Charles went over to the cabin they were staying in and had a brawl with Sam and George Gallagher. He lost the fight and was later found by Isaiah Edwards laying in the back of his buckboard, knocked out. The Gallagher's reign of terror did not come to an end, and they were forced to leave the town. Charles did not usually succumb to violent thoughts. On a different note, the Ingalls family often took people in to their home when no one else would, like Todd Dortmunder, who Charles rehabilitated in a sense after his grandparents couldn't manage him. He also helped Graham Stewart, who was often beat by his alcoholic father, John, by letting him stay at his home with Caroline and the girls, while Charles helped John break his addiction. I always liked Charles, how he was like a man, but also him as a father. Secretly, I was always wished that he was my father, because at the time I had a rough relationship with my own father. So I always dreamt of having a father figure like that. Caroline Ingalls. Caroline Ingalls, or Ma, was the wife of Charles Ingalls and the biological mother of Laura, Mary, Carrie, Charles Jr., and Grace Ingalls. She is also the adoptive mother of 3 children, Albert Quinn, and James and Cassandra Cooper. Caroline was always known to be kind, gentle, generous, and faithful. She often tries to avoid arguments, but sometimes she fails. She was also very loyal to Charles, her husband, and was mistaken in the episode The Handyman that she was in love with another man. She was also very good at controlling her temper, although in the episode The Award, this got quite out of hand, with Caroline soon regretted it. She can also be quietly argumentative with other womenfolk, such as Harriet, especially when it involved her children. She was very protected over them. Caroline does not typically show favoritism with her girls, though on the show she has more sense with Mary and Laura than with any of the others. And in the later years, after Mary leaves, she is particularly close with Laura, guiding her through the teenage and adult years. Caroline was also a character I really love. Not only she was this great mom, but I wonder sometimes how she could manage with all she did. She is a hard-working mother and would care for everyone. One of the great periods was when she bought that restaurant of the Olsons. Laura Ingalls. Laura was the second of 5 children born to Caroline and Charles Ingalls in the dense pine forest near Pippin, Wisconsin, on February the 7th, 1867. As a little girl, Laura was the tomboy of the Ingalls daughters, preferring fishing or playing baseball over other more ladylike activities. After moving to Walnut Grove, Laura met Nellie Olson, and the two were soon embroiled in a famous rivalry that lasted throughout much of their childhood, although they didn't make amends when the two were older. Laura was a spirited young tomboy who would do anything just to go fishing or playing tree cat with the other kids. She hated homework, which she hinted at throughout the first few episodes of the series, but attested to as fact in the episode The Wisdom of Solomon, when a Negro boy comes to the Ingalls household hoping for a better home and education. Laura was also a big fan of animals and had many pets. One of her first pets was her dog Jack, who was her constant companion for many years. She also had a horse, Bunny, who was sold to the Olsen in order to buy Caroline a stove for Christmas. Laura did manage to get Bunny back, but Bunny's life was ended abruptly when she ran over a barbed wire fence. Ultimately, Pa had to shoot Bunny in order to put her out of pain. Jack passed away as well in the Ingalls barn and was buried on a hill in Plum Creek. Laura's second dog, Bandit, remained faithfully by her side through all her teenage years. Around the time of Jack passing, Laura made a new friend in Andrew Garvey. The two were inseparable for a time, and together they cared for a mother wolf and her pups and solved a series of burglaries that plagued the town of Walnut Grove. When the Ingalls moved to Winoka for a brief period, they met Albert, an orphan whom they would later adopt. Andrew and Laura became fast friends with Albert. Shortly after returning to Walnut Grove, Laura met her future husband Amasa Wilder, who was the brother of the new school teacher Eliza Jane, who later helped Laura with her teaching exams. I always loved Laura. She was some kind of a tomboy, but also she could be very ladylike. I remember when she took her first steps in the adulthood as adult Laura. I was very impressed and hoped that I would become a strong woman as her. Mary Amelia Ingalls Kendall was the first daughter of Caroline and Charles Ingalls. She had 7 siblings altogether: Laura, Carrie, Charles Jr., who died short after birth, and Grace, Albert, and later James and Cassandra, who were adopted after Mary left home. The family met Albert, a runaway who had been a ward of the state. Albert never really existed. He was created in the TV version. After they moved temporarily to Winoka to be close to Mary, siblings James and Cassandra were adopted later. Back in Walnut Grove, after their parents died, in a tragic wagon crash. Mary was an adult at the time. The real Mary Ingalls never married, although she did in the TV series. Growing up in Walnut Grove, Mary was an excellent student and spent most of her free time studying. When she was 15, Mary went blind. Her failing eyesight was first noticed during a year checkup at the eye doctor in Mankato. After returning with new lenses and her glasses, she found her vision was still not improved. When Charles took Mary back to the doctor to find out what the problem was, the news was not good. The doctor told Charles that scarlet fever had weakened the nerves in Mary's eyes, and there was little time left before she would go blind. Charles hesitated to tell her this. He finally did. And a few days later, her sight was gone. Dr. Baker suggested that they send Mary to a blind school so she could have some kind of life. Charles and Caroline agreed and made plans for her to be taught at a blind school in Iowa. On arriving at the school, Mary met her teacher, Adam Kendall. Originally, she resented Adam, but this changed shortly thereafter. Later, Adam and Mary fell in love and got married a year later when Mary was 16 and Adam was around 20. Mary never really married and had children. This story was created for the TV series. After Adam asked Mary to marry him and Mary accepted, Mary began to have second thoughts. When Charles and Caroline came to Winoka for the wedding and told Mary and Adam's story of Mary's childhood and how she used to wander off a lot, meaning she used to dash out of the house whenever her parents' back were turned. After hearing this, Mary became anxious, realizing that she and Adam were both blind and that if their child were to wander away, she and Adam would not be able to find them. This worried Mary excessively, to the point that she told Adam that she didn't want to marry him, even thought she was still very much in love with him. Adam was heartbroken by this and begged Mary to change her mind. Soon after that, while Mary and Adam went on a picnic with Charles and Caroline, and the children from the blind school, a massive dust storm suddenly came up. During the storm, one of the blind girls got lost, and Adam and Mary began to search for her. When they find her, Mary realized that she is capable of doing big things, even though she is blind, and so asked Adam if she could still marry him. He says yes. Mary then asked Adam and the blind girls if the girl could be the flower girl at Adam's wedding. Suddenly, they hear Charles call their names through the storm, while Mary and Adam kissed. The next day, Mary and Adam get married and begin their new life together. 3 months into their marriage, Mary and Adam moved to Walnut Grove to open a new blind school with another blind school and to be closer to Mary's family. In the episode The Sound of Children, Mary finds out that she is 4 months pregnant with her and Adam's first child. A month later, Mary miscarried the baby, who was said to have been a baby boy by Dr. Baker. Upon hearing this, Mary is devastated and falls into a depression. But eventually, with the help and support of her family and friends, pulls herself out of it. Mary and Adam accepted the fact that they lost their son and used the tragic circumstances to help make them stronger. They are also willing to try again for another child. 4 months later, a year into their marriage, Mary became pregnant with her and Adam's second child. 9 months later, nearly 2 years into their marriage, Mary gave birth in a perfectly healthy boy, whom she and Adam named Adam Charles Holbrook Kendall. Adam after Mary's husband, Charles after Mary's father, and Holbrook after Mary's grandfather on her mother's side. Sadly, a month later, while Adam Kendall Jr. was still a baby, he died, along with Alice Garvey, both fictional characters, in a fire at the blind school. Because Alice told Mary she would get the baby, but ended up saving another student first, causing delay in getting the baby and herself safely out. The fire was unintentionally started by Mary's adopted brother, Albert, and a friend who were smoking in the basement of the building during a party. Mary went into a state of shock after this, and eventually came out of it. 1.5 years later, her husband and teacher Adam regained his sight, and they moved to New York, where Adam was a lawyer. Mary and Adam's final appearance on the show was in a Christmas episode, where they traveled into Walnut Grove just prior to a blizzard and spent Christmas at Charles and Caroline's house. Shortly after this, Charles, Caroline, Albert, Carrie, and their other children moved out of Walnut Grove. Laura, Amanda, and their baby Rose were the only family members to remain in town. Although Charles and Albert visited several times, Adam and Mary remained in New York after that. As a child, Mary was unusually the gentle one of the family, and was especially close to her mom. However, as the eldest, she was also the dependable. She was willing to fight to stand up for her family if needed. An example of this is in the episode The Bully Boys, where Mary stands up to schoolyard bully Baba Gallagher when he arrested the children. Mary was very pretty growing up. With her blue eyes and golden hair, and boys always seemed to be smitten with her, much to Laura's dismay. She rarely reciprocated their affections, and was in the case of Johnny Johnson. In a letter to his parents, Charles once wrote that boys are already flocking around Mary like bees to honey. She was quite intelligent, and Laura once stated that Mary could write as good as Miss Beadle. Mary was very protective of her younger sisters, often seen taking care of baby Carrie. She was always so close to Laura, worrying about her when Nellie Olsen faked friendship with Laura in the episode entitled Talking Machine. If Laura had taken heed of Mary's warning, she wouldn't have been hurt by Nellie's backstabbing. Mary was a real big sister. The sad part was when she was blind, but she met the love of her life in Adam. The first few meeting was very funny, and it did remind me of Percival and Nellie. What was also funny, I will come to them later. Carrie Celesta Ingalls, later known under her married name in real life as Carrie Ingalls Swansea, was the third child of Charles and Caroline Ingalls, and was born in Montgomery County, Kansas. She was a younger sister of Laura Ingalls Wilder, who is known for her little house book prior to the birth of Grace. Carrie was always the baby in the family. When the Ingalls family first moved to Walnut Grove, Carrie stayed home with Caroline, since she was too young to go to school. When she was old enough, however, Carrie did go to school. Carrie was very close to her adopted sister Cassandra, when she and her older brother James came to live with the Ingalls. Sometimes Carrie was shown to have wild imagination. She dreamt that she had a fairy godsister named Alyssa that looked just like her, and she believed Alyssa was real. Later, her pa convinced her that Alyssa was just her imagination, and she made up the character of Out of Loneliness. Carrie, unlike her brother and sister, seems to grow up slowly. She always wanted to share rooms with Laura. When the Ingalls family moved to Winoka, Carrie excitedly exclaims, "I get to sleep with Laura just like Mary used to." While Laura wasn't looking forward to it, Carrie can also get into mischief. Like when she'd take a nap in the balloon when Mary's boyfriend Patrick, out of anger and jealousy, cuts the ropes and sends the balloon off with Carrie inside. Luckily, she is saved by Charles and Patrick. Albert Quinn Ingalls. Albert Quinn Ingalls was a young boy whose biological father was Jeremy Quinn. He was put in many orphanages as a child. He was bullied because he was very big or able to fight back even though he tried. He ran away when he was very young and lived on his own. He was able to survive on his own in a big city when Charles and Caroline showed up in Winoka. Albert came back to Walnut Grove with the family. He was then adopted by Charles and Caroline, making Mary, Laura, Carrie, and Grace his adopted siblings. In later episodes, he became the adopted brother to James and Cassandra. Albert is adopted son of Charles and Caroline Ingalls. He was introduced to the Ingalls family when Laura caught him stealing newspapers and money from the hotel where her family worked in Winoka when he was about 10 years old. Charles let him go after returning the money and paper, but later he caught him stealing a lantern from a store and chased him to where he was living underneath some stairs. He didn't want the caught as he didn't want to live in an orphanage again, but he didn't need it to steal to survive. Charles had compassion and purchased the lantern for him. Albert was later invited to Mary's birthday party when he was introduced to the rest of the Ingalls and the other guests as a friend of Charles. When the time came for the Ingalls to leave Winoka, he conveyed them back to Walnut Grove. But times were rough for him. He went away several times, once because Laura was jealous of him. After searching for his birth father for a family tree project at school, Charles adopted him as his son. During his teenage years, Albert ran through many romantic relationships. His first relationship was with an emotionally abused teenager girl named Sylvia Webb. Unfortunately, their relationship was short-lived. Sylvia had been adopted, raped, and impregnated by the town blacksmith Ive Hardwick. At first, Albert was through the half-fathering Sylvia's unborn child that, thanks to rumors spread by Harry Olsen. Sadly, Sylvia suffered mortal injury when she fell off a ladder, trying to evade Hardwick, who tried to assault her for the second time. Sometime later, when Charles decided to move out of Walnut Grove, he and the family left the town. But when Albert moved to Burr Oak, Iowa, Charles was told by the police that he had started stealing again. He was brought back home, and the family found out that he was addicted to morphine. After he was off of it, he decided to go to medical school to become a doctor. He planned to go to college, but he became severely ill and was sent into the hospital. Once diagnosed, Albert decided to leave the hospital and return to Walnut Grove to spend the final months of his life. While Charles was giving a speech on crop sharing, Laura and a severely ill Albert followed a group of students up a mountain where they have shared fond memories of their past. I always had liked Albert. I even had a crush on him. So it was a little shock when that episode aired of him being addicted to drugs, and how he died was also shocking. I always loved the good and soft-spoken Albert, how he blended in with the family Ingalls. He was so lucky Charles came into his life, and this would be the perfect happy ending of a lonely boy who found his family. Nels Olsen. Nels Olsen is a co-proprietor of Olsen Mercantile with his wife Harriet Olsen. In total, they have 3 children, Nellie, Willie, and an adopted daughter named Nancy. Harriet and Nels are the perfect example of a love-hate relationship. They argue and bicker often, but only on a handful of time they took it to the next level. For example, when Caroline Ingalls brought in a basket of eggs to be put on their credit for the mercantile, Harriet was in a snooty mood and said the eggs were not acceptable. After arguing, Harriet dumped the basket of eggs on Nell's head and left the room. He was humiliated and paid Caroline the normal price for the eggs. Soon the two separated for a bit, but did manage to work out their problems and get back together. After living in Walnut Grove for quite some time, the Olsen family had to move to Winoka because of the Walnut Grove blistering economic situation. Nels and later Harriet both worked in the saloon. Nels kept the books and Harriet worked as a barmaid. One night, Nels won a large sum of money from gambling, and they decided to return to Walnut Grove. Nels was always one of my favorite characters, and I never understood why he even married Harriet. He was so very patient to have her as his wife, and then his daughter and adopted daughter. Then that man had to have a tough time, and I think because of his character, he is one of the likable characters in the Little House on the Prairie. Harriet Olsen is the co-proprietor of Olsen Mercantile with her husband Nels and is also the local town gossip. Harriet wears the pants in the family, so to speak, and she makes a lot of the decision and does not most of the business. Now she tolerates this to a point, but occasionally makes a stand. For example, not long after the Ingalls family moved to Walnut Grove, Caroline bought some eggs to the mercantile to be used for credit. Harriet was in a snooty mood, and the time and said the eggs were not acceptable. Nell disagreed and told Harriet that she should be locked in a cage. Furious, Harriet took the basket of eggs and dumped them over Nell's head while Caroline was watching. They separated for a time. Nels moved to the hotel and Harriet stayed at the mercantile. They did get back together later. Desperate, a useless attempt made by Reverend Alden to get the two together. Harriet Olsen is a nutshell, a very stubborn, snooty person, thinking only of herself. Her husband was storming against this and tried to discipline her any time possible. She is not nice, and she is often made a fuss about the quality of the eggs Karen daily bought in. She became better after Nellie got married, as did Willie, but she never got the reflection of her personality correct. She did spoil her children. It is unknown why Harriet thought Nancy was similar to Nellie, as they were almost completely different, apart from teasing. As for example, Nancy was quite wicked, although Nellie was just snobbish. Harriet was almost going to become less spiteful in the episode The Compound, but due to Nellie falling in the water with Laura, this changed. Oh my god. Harriet Olsen, the drama queen of Walnut Grove. Although she could get the blood on my nails, in the end I did like her. Nellie Olsen Dalton was the oldest child of Harriet and Nels Olsen. Nellie has two siblings, Willie and an adopted sister Nancy. She married Percival Dalton and had two children with him. Nellie was a sporty girl, the daughter of a wealthy general store owner and his wife, who got everything she wanted from her mother when she was little. As a result, she became rather bratty, and all the other kids hated her for it, including me, except for in the end. Nellie was the first real antagonist on the show. She served as a rival and nemesis to show's protagonist, Laura Ingalls. She would always try to sabotage Laura, but usually failed in her efforts. At the end of the episodes, Laura would successfully accept her revenge on Nellie. Nellie had much misfortune in her quarrels with Laura. Throughout the series, she had a horse manure thrown on her, was pushed down a hill in a wheelchair, was pushed into mud, and was even punched in the face by Laura at least twice. After some years, Laura and Nellie stopped hating each other, and then they became close friends. As a gift for finishing school, Harriet and Nels gave Nellie a restaurant. Karen Ingalls was soon hired as a cook and waitress. Percival Dalton was hired to teach Nellie how to cook and went to a successful restaurant. Initially, Nellie was her typical mean-spirited, snarky self, but Percival eventually got her to change her ways, and she matured into a kinder, warmer, and more present person. Eventually, Percy fell in love with Nellie. After declaring their love for each other, they decided to marry outside, due to Percival being Jewish, and much to Harriet's dismay. Percival and Nellie later married and had two children, Jennifer and Benjamin Dalton. Percival's father passed away soon after, and the family then moved to New York so Percival could take over his father's store. Eventually, Nellie returned to Walnut Grove to visit her family. However, her adopted sister Nellie became jealous of the attention Nellie was getting and run away from home. Like her mom, I couldn't stand her. She was mean, lazy, and spoiled. So it was super fun when Percival came into her life and she completely changed. He was the one who fought her, win her over, and make her change forever. Even when she returned for a holiday to Walnut Grove and had the twins, she couldn't believe she was the same as Nancy. Willie Olson was the son and second child of Nels and Harriet Olson. Willie lived in Walnut Grove in his family store. Mischievous and spoiled as a child, Willie caused trouble and played pranks on the other children, including his own older sister Nellie. It appears that as a child in his early teens, Willie had a soft spot for candy and would often try to take candy from his family store. Most of the time, he got into fight and trouble with Laura Ingalls. If they played marbles and Laura won, he would refuse to hand over his marbles and argue with her until Miss Beadle came along. He often abuses the Ingalls children and once bit Mary, and kicked Laura on one or more occasions. Like with Nellie, Willie was rarely punished, being prevented from being so by his mother, save for when her image or some precious objects of her was damaged or destroyed. He was sometimes a peeping Tom. Sometimes he would look through the woman's underwear catalogue, but only when his mother wasn't around. He even tried to watch Laura while she was changing her clothes, but only once. He had a ravenous appetite for food and was often known to go along with his sister's schemes into exchange for food. He was often seen stealing food from people's plates, like he did with his father when Harriet was out of the house, after leaving over to the woman's right petition. His father never could understand where he put all the food that he ate. He was seen experimenting with food when he is seen making a ridiculously overblown sandwich while his pants were out. The reincarnation of Nellie, his appetite foiled Nancy's plan to use licorice-shaped revolver to hold up the Walnut Grove Bank to get the ransom money when a pair of kidnappers abducted their parents, when he simply ate it because he got hungry while waiting. He, along with other Olsons, the Garveys and the Ingalls, move and stay in Winoka for a period of time. Nelson and Harriet are the only family who are able to afford to send their children to the Winoka school, which Willie hates because he doesn't like the tie on the uniform and wishes he could go to school with Laura, which Nellie despises. Willie had a time trying to make friends and often had trouble to bribe and barter with the other kids to even get them to talk to him properly. Once some of his so-called friends tried to get him to steal cigarettes from his family store, Cal Edwards, one of the kids he bartended with, who never liked him and once got him into trouble when he traded him some leftover fireworks for some eggies. These schemes always got him into trouble, and Nellie sometimes bribes him to help her with her schemes, and when Nellie gives Willie a smoke pipe to tell everyone to vote for her, but Willie ends up voting for Elmer, Dogskin, because Nellie keeps picking on him and Elmer won't let her. Although Willie was very mischievous and sometimes mean, on a rare occasion Willie could be nice when he is seen comforting the sadness and guilt-ridden Miss Beadle during the devastation blizzard. It was a school where Willie often got into trouble. He was always being sent into the corner for his behavior by his teachers, Miss Beadle, Mrs. Garvey, Miss Eliza Jane Wilder, and later, yes, Mrs. Laura Ingalls Wilder. Willie later matured into a responsible young man after Laura became his teacher. His major change in attitude came after Laura had collapsed in the field from a heat stroke from overwork due to Amanzo's absence. Willie demonstrated genuine responsibility in immediately fetching Dr. Baker, which saved her life. Caroline later told him the story Stone Soup. Was a very funny one. Understand the moral of the story. He and his classmates filled buckets of water to help irrigate Laura's crop. Afterwards, he amended his old ways and started behaving properly and fully. Against his mother's wishes, he married Rachel Brown. Willie was always a troublemaker, but in the end, everything would be alright. In the end, when Laura went away from Walnut Grove and she sent him one more time into the corner, he cried. And that was one of the times we saw him that he really cares. Nancy Olsen was the adopted daughter of Nels and Harriet Olsen. Harriet showed interest in her immediately after seeing her in the orphanage because of her resemblance to Nellie in her youth. She was scheduled to be transferred to a special facility in Minnesota before being discovered by Harriet. Not wanting to be adopted, she at first ran away, but when brought back, Harriet convinced her to come live with her and the Olsens in the exchange for being pampered and spoiled by Harriet. Unfortunately, Nancy's personality and behavior was worse than Nellie's was when she was young. After being brought back from the orphanage, Nancy was quickly spoiled by Harriet and soon after caused trouble in Walnut Grove, like fooling Willie into locking fellow classmates and rival Belinda Stephen in an ice shed that Nancy could play the lead part in an upcoming musical at the school. Nancy also convinced the Olsen and town that she was abandoned by her mother. Charles Ingalls ran into the man that ran the orphanage where Nancy was from and found out that her story was a lie. It turns out that Nancy's mother died while giving birth, and she was forced to move into an orphanage because of her increasingly uncontrollable behavior. Laura, with some help of Belinda Stevens, convinced Nancy to be the queen of the dunk tank at Walnut Grove upcoming festival. This proved to be the first of many schemes of for Nancy. Nancy caused a lot of trouble through the series. She used an obese boy, Elmer, to do her homework. After learning responsibility, Willie begins to find his sister's behavior insufferable, and once shamed her during the stone soup thing, when she refused to help because of the heat, when Willie and all the other kids helped to integrate Laura's drop chicken field by pouring a bucket of water over her head to cool her off. She bullies Cassandra sometimes, and when she is about to get in trouble, she says, "You hate me! Why does everyone hate me?" Often before bursting into tears and sobbing. This makes Harriet quickly forgive her while Nels just rolled his eyes. Nancy once met Nellie, and they didn't really get along. Nellie had a huge birthday party, and Nancy didn't get enough attention, so she ran away. But Nellie found her in the woods after she was attacked by a wolf. Shocked by her behavior and remembers how her mother had spoiled her, Nellie pitied her and brought her home, and it seems as though Nellie learned a lesson, but of course she didn't. The Olsens later got Nancy a rabbit, but she ended up killing it as a result of her negligence. Well, she is the same as Nellie when she was young, and I had no hope for her. She always was mean and spoiled, and in one way, and I hoped she would come around like Nellie, but that wasn't the case. Once again, poor Nels and poor Willie. Jennifer Mary Jenny Wilder was the niece of Almanzo and Laura Ingalls Wilder. Jenny is the niece of Laura and Amanso. After her father, Royal Wilder, dies, while grieving over his death, she attempts to kill herself by trying to drown her, hoping that she could reunite with her family in heaven. Her friend Jeff Carter gets her just in time to save her, even though he doesn't know how to swim. Laura later teases Jenny that her parents would want her to live even if they couldn't be with her. In school, Jenny was teased frequently by Nancy. Of course. Jenny was temporarily held hostage by Laura by the madman Thomas Stark, who believed them to be his wife and daughter, Constance and Elizabeth, who he had recently shot in a fit of rage and madness. Jenny demonstrated wit and great courage, and she helps her aunt play along with Stark's madness. Jenny and Laura managed to survive being hurt by the crazed Stark until help arrived. Stark, however, was shot dead outside the door when he refused to drop his pistol. One day while swimming in a lake in Walnut Grove with Jeb Jackson and Willie, Jenny realized that she has lost her locket at the bottom of the lake and desperately wants to find it. She finds it but gets stuck on something attached to the bottom and falls unconscious before she is rescued. She's taken to Dr. Baker and he tells her adoptive parents that due to her being down too long, she has suffocated brain damage due to the lack of oxygen, which will make it hard for her to speak and move. Laura and Amanda accepted this and care for her accordingly. Later she meets and becomes friends with an old and retired doctor named Marvin Haynes, who helps her heal by convincing her, Laura and Amanda, that she can be normal again. After a few months, Jenny recovers and can speak and move properly again. I always liked Jenny, and in the beginning I really need to watch twice. Yes, it was Shannon Doherty who played her. Shannon, who also played Brenda from Beverly Hills 90210. I think this would be one of her first acting jobs. Almanzo James Wilder was born in February 13, 1857 and died at October 23rd, 1949. He was the husband of Laura Ingalls Wilder and the father of Rose Wilder Lane, both noted authors. He is portrayed in the NBC TV series Little House on the Prairies and the 3 subsequent LHO TV movies by actor Dean Butler. Wilder is also a well-known character in the Little House books, where his wife wrote about their courtship and subsequent marriage in The Long Winter, Little Town on the Prairie, These Happy Golden Years, and The First 4 Years. He also appears briefly in the chapter 28 of By the Shores of Silver Lake. Almanzo was characterized as a quietly courageous, hard-working man who loved horses and farming. He was also an accomplished carpenter and woodworker. Father Boy recounts events of Wilder's childhood starting when he was 8 years old. In 1866, among other things, he goes to school when not needed at home for the farm work. He learns to drive a team of oxen, attends to a county fair, and enjoys middle 19th century 4th of July celebration in town. He also learned how to deal with being bossed around by his older sibling, particularly his strong-willed sister Eliza Jane, who would later become a teacher of his future wife. Almanzo was one of my favorite, and I could see why Laura was falling in love with him. I think many teenage girls would have a crush on him. He is a very good man and he loves Laura very much. Also, the courtship between Laura and Almanzo was very beautiful to see. Isaiah Edwards, also known as Mr. Edwards, was a mountain man who first met the Ingalls family while they were living on the open prairies of Kansas and later settled in Walnut Grove. Edward was a good but troubled man. He had many bouts with alcoholism, loss of faith, and depression due to past personal tragedies. As a result, he was known to get into brawls and gamble away his money. However, he would remain a faithful friend to the Ingalls family and Laura's family, and he even became Laura's godfather. Mrs. Edward was one of my favorite characters. He was fun, but also a troubled man. But we still loved him. Jonathan Garvey is the husband of Alice Garvey and the father of Andrew Garvey. After moving to Walnut Grove, Jonathan worked on his land and the mill with Charles Ingalls. Once when the Garvey's barn burned down, Alice took a job at the post office. Jonathan was outraged by this, which led to the Garveys almost getting a divorce. Thankfully, Alice and Jonathan worked through their issues and stayed married to each other. When the telephone came to Walnut Grove, Jonathan got Alice one as a gift. This proved to be disastrous since the switchboard was located at Nellie's restaurant and Harriet Olsen took responsibilities as the switchboard operator. After listening to the private conversation between Alice and her mother, Harriet thinks that Alice was once married before, which she quickly spread around Walnut Grove. Jonathan learned of this and found it to be true. So he and Charles go to visit Alice's ex-husband, but Jonathan does not tell him who he is. After seeing and talking to Alice's ex, they visit Alice's mother. In the end, however, the Garveys got back together. Years later, in the fire at the blind school, Alice, while trying to save Adams Kendall Jr., was killed. This affected Andrew and Jonathan deeply, and during the time, Jonathan started drinking heavily and Andy left to go stay at the Ingalls for a short time. However, Jonathan stopped excessive drinking and started on a new foot with Andrew. Andy and Jonathan stayed in Walnut Grove for a while, but eventually left to start a business. Andrew Andy Garvey is the son of Alice and Jonathan Garvey. After moving to Walnut Grove, Andy soon became friends with Laura Ingalls and the two had many adventures together, such as caring for a mother wolf and her babies and solving a series of burglaries in Walnut Grove. Andy left Walnut Grove with his parents, the Ingalls and the Olsens, for the time and settled in Winoka. This is also where they met Albert, whom Andy became friends with as well. Years later, Andy's mother, Alice, and Adam Cannon Jr. were killed in a fire at the blind school. This affected Andy and Jonathan deeply, and during this period, Jonathan started to drink heavily, prompting Andy to stay at the Ingalls home for a while. Jonathan and Andy stayed in Walnut Grove after Alice died, but eventually left the town and moved to the town of Sleepy Eye. In Sleepy Eye, Andy and his father Jonathan set up a warehouse business. Adam Kendall. Adam Kendall was the husband of Mary Ingalls. At a young age, Adam was fishing with his father. As he was walking over the rocks to cross the rushing stream, he fell in and hit his head. He woke up in the doctor's office blind. Adam first met Mary when she was sent to the Burton School for Blind in Iowa, where he worked as a teacher. At first she despised him, but eventually the two fell in love and got married. After moving the blind school and combining it with Hester Sue to new school, they stayed in Walnut Grove until the blind school was burned down by a fire that was accidentally started by Albert Ingalls and a friend. In this fire, he and Mary lost their infant son, Adam Charles. After the fire accident, with the help of Laura Ingalls, she and the other children restored an old building to a new blind school in Sleepy Eye that was dedicated to Alice Garvey and Adam Charles Holbrook Kendall Jr., who died in the fire at the old school. A year later, in a freak accident, Adam's sight was restored. Although his wife was still blind, attending law school on a scholarship, he was able to realize his dream of becoming a lawyer, something he had wanted to do until he went blind in an accident as a boy. He set up his first law office in Walnut Grove, but eventually left because of the small need for lawyers in a quiet town. Adam left for New York, with Mary to work at his father's law firm. Hester Sue Terhune first was a teacher at the blind school that was later merged with the one operated by Adam and Mary English Kendall when they moved to Walnut Grove. She also worked as a waitress at Nellie's restaurant. Hester Sue was married once, to Sam Terhune, but divorced because of his gambling and drinking habits. While living in Walnut Grove, Sam returns on convinced Hester Sue that he had changed his ways. They planned to get remarried until Sam's wife, Naomi, showed up. It became clear to Hester Sue that Sam hadn't changed and the two did not get married. In addition, Hester Sue also had a relationship with Joe Keegan. She also once spent Christmas at the English home, recalling her favorite holiday memories. I love Hester Sue. She is tough, strong, but a fairy lady. She's one of my favorite side characters. She also reminds me of the black woman Grace from Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. Hiram Baker, more often referred to as Doc Baker or simply Doc, is a friendly doctor and veterinarian who serves Walnut Grove and the surrounding areas. His office is located in the same building as the post office. He rarely works with help, except on a few occasions. For example, when Harriet Olsen's niece Kate came to visit, she accompanied him during his rounds. During this time, Dr. Baker fell in love with Kate and proceeded to court her, until he was honest with himself and realized the fact that he was much too old for her. Years later, when the town became bankrupt, many of the town people from Walnut Grove moved to Winoka. However, he stayed behind to look after Lars Hansen. Sadly, Lars never recovered and Walnut Grove went into despair. Luckily, many former citizens came back to the town and helped Baker restore Walnut Grove back to its former glory. Lars, who had just had a stroke, managed to recover slightly since Walnut Grove had become a town again. After the death of Laura and Amanda's baby, Laura blamed Dr. Baker for the death of her baby boy. Later, she apologized. Dr. Baker was an exceptional man, a pioneer on healing, and he was super resourceful, which I like to resolve illness. Reverend Robin Alden. Prior to entering the ministry, Robin Alden was a farmer and family man living in the Walnut Grove area. Then a disaster killed his entire family, and a deeply grieving Alden turned to alcohol for solace. Then one day, after hearing God's voice, he was inspired to become the born again Christian and become a minister. The Reverend Robin Alden, more often referred to simply as Reverend Alden, is the clergyman at the Walnut Grove Church and School. Throughout the television series, he was portrayed by Debs Greer. The character of Reverend Alden was based on a real-life character from On the Banks of Plum Creek. Alden, a home missionary from the East Coast, had been involved in starting a new church on the western frontier, including one in Walnut Grove. Throughout the series run, Alden is shown as a loving, caring man who faithfully ministered the Walnut Grove Township. He has a particularly close relationship with the Ingalls family, and is also shown to be good friends with Doug Baker and Nels Olson. However, Alden does show stubbornness from time to time, and well as a sense of pride. The latter is shown in an episode The Fatal Healer, when a charismatic man claims to have healing powers woos most of Alden's congregation, deeply upsetting Alden. He also can show a fierce temper, evidential by the episode's threat. After he is butted by a goat, he delivered off-screen a very sermon one Sunday and a bully boast, where he stands up and one point got physical with a troublemaking family. In 1997, Alden finds love when he meets and marries church parishioner Anna Craig. Despite threats by Mrs. Olsen to have him dismissed from his duties, Anna fate follows the nuptials and unknown, although she is referred into a later episode. Reverend Alden continued his ministries until the series final, Little House: The Last Farewell. When the township make the final stand against land baron Nathan Lassie, after he was proven to hold deed to land on which Walnut Grove was situated. When the township blow up the town buildings one by one, with only the church and scooping remaining, Lasseter realized he will have to rebuild everything. Lasseter is then told by leaders of other settlements that they too will blow up their buildings to discourage his plans. When Lasseter walks over in defeat, Alden loudly proclaims, "Did you hear? Walnut Grove did not die in vain." In storyline terms, Alden really shared his background with others. The only time this past is shared was in 1982 episode A Promise to Keep, where Alden helps console Mr. Edwards, who has relapsed into alcoholism after the death of his son and loss of his family due to his behavior. This man always brings good to the township of Walnut Grove. For a long time he was the reverend of the town, and all of them loved him. It was shocking that he eventually left Walnut Grove, but he will always remember it. So guys, this was a little bit of my view of the Little House on the Prairie. Leave some comments on the Facebook group or YouTube channel and tell me what you think about the Little House on the Prairie. I really like to hear what are your own nostalgic stories when you are watching Little House on the Prairie. And like I said, I always watched this with my mother, and it was very special. And for me, it was like a little bit of family time. So once again, tell me what you think about it, and I'd love to hear your opinion. Dear listeners, thank you for listening, and join me in 2 weeks for a new episode of Orinda Talks. You can listen and subscribe to Orinda Talks on the YouTube channel or join the Facebook group. If you'd like to comment or talk with me about this episode, you can reach out on the Facebook group or the YouTube channel of Orinda Talks. The next episode is about Harry Potter. I also like to tell you about my other podcast called Girls Talking Trek. Together with my co-host Amanda, we recap every 2 weeks a Star Trek episode, starting with Star Trek TNG. All the episodes will be recapping chronically following. We'll approach each episode with humor and a feminine look. Girls Talking Trek is to listen, follow and subscribe on Anchor, Google Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, the Facebook group and the YouTube channel. I will see you in 2 weeks.